our talk is entitled Terminologue and Open Source Terminology Solutions. It will be given by both myself and Michal, as we said, and hopefully that'll go smoothly, just being in two different locations. So I'm just going to give an overview of the talk and some background information, and then Michal will go into some more detail about Terminologue. So next slide, please, Michal.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. So what are we talking about today? This talk is about Terminologue, a cloud-based open source terminology management tool created by Dublin City University. It is written in JavaScript, EJS and CSS and runs on Node.js and SQLite. The source code is available at github.com/gaois/terminologue. So this is for people wishing to install Terminologue on their own server. And a cloud-based instance is available to use at terminologue.org. And here people can sign up to use Terminologue free of charge without having to install anything. This talk will give a background to how Terminologue came about, and as well as describe the main features of it and the basis for them. And as I said, I will present the background and Michal will present the features. So next slide, please. So this is a screenshot of terminologue.org. This is the cloud-based installation we host for anyone to use as is, free of charge. And we have about 1,000 users so far. Alternatively, as I said, you can download the source code and install your own installation on your own server. And we provide documentation to help people wishing to do this. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, the source code is available at github.com/gaois/terminologue. So next slide, please. So how did Terminologue come about? Terminologue was created for the National Terminology Database for Irish. The content of this database, currently about 200,000 concepts, is created by the Irish National Terminology Committee and is administered by Furras na Gaeilge, the body responsible for the promotion of the Irish language throughout the island of Ireland. And the Gaois Research Group in Dublin City University, that's us, created and administered the database and its interfaces for Furras na Gaeilge. And the database is publicly available at terminologue.ie. And just to say, all of this is kind of important because the way that Terminologue has turned out is a direct result of the requirements of the National Terminology Database for Irish. And this sort of helps to explain how Terminologue diverges in some ways from standard approaches. So next slide, please, Michal. So this is a screenshot of terma.ie. This is the public interface to the National Terminology Database for Irish. The material available here is produced in a private instance of Terminologue used by Furras na Gaeilge, the National Terminology Committee, and ourselves in DCU. The material is synchronized from a Terminologue SQLite database to a more powerful SQL Server database used by the public site. And this is important because the site handles up to 1 million queries per month. And next slide, please. And then this is a screenshot of the private instance of Terminologue I mentioned above that is used for the Terma project. So this is a different copy of Terminologue, not the same one that's at terminologue.org. And next slide, please, Michal. And so just to conclude, the background before I pass you over to Michal. Terminologue was created in 2019 as a replacement for the original terminology management system created for Focal.ie, which was the predecessor to Terma.ie. And that was created originally around 2005. Many of its features were inherited from the original system. Because the work was publicly funded, we decided to make the new system open source. In addition, it was decided to host a separate cloud-based instance of the software for external users to create and publish term bases. And the interface is now available in 10 languages with the translations provided by our users. And just to say that the languages so far are English, Irish, Czech, Swedish, Welsh, Finnish, Dutch, Russian, Spanish, Croatian, and German. So it's a bit of a random mix. Some of the translators are present here today, so thank you. And we don't have French yet, but I think we have an offer from someone to do French. Yeah, so that's all I'll say. I'll pass it over to Michal, who's going to describe the features of Terminologue. So thanks very much.
Yes, hello. So my name is Michal, and I'm the developer behind Terminologue. And my job here today is to walk you through it, which is a difficult job to do because, as far as I know, many people who are present here today are already users of Terminologue or even contributors to Terminologue. Anyway, the first thing you need to understand about Terminologue is that it's a web-based application, so it's not something you download and install on your computers. It's you have to go online to terminologue.org and you have to sign up for an account. To sign up for an account, you simply need to give Terminologue your email address, then you will receive a confirmation email, and from that moment, you will be able to start using Terminologue. So once you have an account, you can log in, and this is the screen you will see after you log in. So you will see a list of the term bases that you have access to. And you can also create your own term base or term bases if you want. You can create as many term bases as you want. It costs nothing. You don't have to pay. There are no limitations to the number of, let's say, entries or terms you can have in a term base. It's all completely free. And you can, as well as that, you can always delete a term base that you have created. You create a term base just by filling in a simple form like this. And once your term base is created, then this is the screen you will be spending most of your time looking at, editing entries in the term base. So what you see on your screen is that on the left-hand side, you will have a list of entries. And then in this larger space on the right-hand side, this is where you edit an individual entry, right? So the kinds of data that you can have in terminological entries in Terminologue are very similar to what you would expect to find in any terminology management system, right? So obviously you can include terms in many languages. You can annotate terms with things like part of speech labels. You can add inflected forms to terms. You can add various kinds of transfer comments and things like that. So those will be the term level the term level data that you can have in a terminological entry in Terminologue. You can add domain labels to concepts or to entries. The domain labels in Terminologue can be hierarchical, so you can have a hierarchical tree of domains and subdomains and sub-subdomains and so on. You can add definitions in different languages to entries. You can add example sentences. You can have lots of administrative data attached to entries, like their status, whether they're publishable or not, when were they last updated, and so on, right? So this is what it looks like when you're editing a term base in Terminologue. Each term base can be configured with its own settings. So there are a lot of things that you can configure for every term base. I'm only going to take you through some of them. So, for example, you can set up your own list of part of speech labels, which are relevant for the languages that your term base is about. You can set up your own list of domain labels if you want. And as I have said, the domain labels can be hierarchical. One important thing about Terminologue is that in Terminologue, you can collaborate with other people on the same term base. So after you have created a term base, you can decide who are the other people who are going to be allowed to have access to it. And also you have control over what kind of access these people have. There are a total of 5 different access levels available in Terminologue. So you can decide for each user what kind of access they have, ranging from basically just read-only access, where the person can only look but can't change anything, all the way to a level called configurator, which is a type of user who can change absolutely everything. And then there are many intermediate steps between that. For example, there is a level for users who are able to make changes to existing entries, but who are not allowed to create any new entries or delete any entries and so on, right? Yes, so you are spending a lot of time editing a term base in Terminologue, and then at some point you reach a point where you say, okay, my term base is more or less ready. I would like to do something with it. I would like to show it to somebody. So there are 2 things you can do in Terminologue. one thing you can do is that you can make a term base publicly available, and you can do that right in Terminologue. You don't have to build a separate website for that. So you can go to the settings of your term base and you can change the access level of the entire term base from private to public. And this means that from this moment onwards, the term base will be viewable publicly on the web. So when somebody visits your term base on the web, they will get a homepage like this. And from this, they can perform searches and navigate to the individual entries and so on. And this is publicly viewable, so no password required. So what you need to understand is that every term base in Terminologue has two interfaces. There is the public interface, which those have been the screenshots that you have seen up till now. This is only accessible to people who have an account in Terminologue and who have access to that particular term base. And then there is this public interface, which is available to everybody on the web if you have decided that you want to make your term base publicly available. Another thing that you can do with your term base in Terminologue is that you can export it into either TBX or a plain text file. You can export either the entire term base or you can export just a subset of the entries. So you can get your term base out of Terminologue in TBX. It's TBX version 2, by the way. We're not exporting into TBX version 3 yet. This is obviously a very important feature for some of our users because users don't want to be locked in, right? So people want to be safe in the knowledge that they can always export their data and take their data somewhere else if they want to. We're also working on a feature which will allow people to import data from TBX into Terminologue, but that's not available yet. We're working on that. Yeah, so that has been a very quick walk through Terminologue. What I want to do for the next couple of screenshots is I want to show you some of the features that I think are a little bit special about Terminologue. Features that maybe Terminologue has, but other terminology management systems maybe don't have them, right? So one thing that we are very proud of in Terminologue is the intelligent search algorithm that we have there. If you search for something, for a word in your term base, either through the public interface or through the editorial interface, there is a relatively linguistically smart, intelligent algorithm behind that, which can find multi-word terms where that particular term occurs, even if it's in an inflected form. It's an algorithm which can suggest terms with similar spellings and so on. So the search functions in Terminologue are probably a little bit more intelligent than what you would typically have in a simple kind of a string or substring matching algorithm. In addition to that, we have a lot of, let's say, filtering or search and filtering features. So if you have a very, very large term base in Terminologue with hundreds of thousands of entries, you probably want to filter them by some criteria. You can do that in Terminologue. You can filter entries by, by domains, by various administrative statuses, and so on. You can filter entries by, whether or not they have a definition, whether or not they have a term in one language or another, and so on. So this is very important for very large databases or for very large term bases. Another thing which is very special about Terminologue is that when you're attaching part of speech labels to terms, you can attach a part of speech label not just to the entire term, but also to an individual word inside the term. Right. This is something we use a lot in the Irish National Terminology Database because there is a tradition in Irish language terminography to to annotate individual words inside multi-word terms, such as the head noun in a noun phrase and so on. So we built a tool that enables that. I think it's very unusual in terminology management systems that people would need to do that, but we do need to do that, so we have a feature for that in Terminologue. Another thing which is really special about Terminologue is how we handle polysemous terms. So a polysemous term would be a term which is included in more than one concept. We have a lot of these in the Irish National Terminology Database because it's a database which covers many different subject areas. And in Terminologue, we are able to not simply copy and paste or to keep copies, separate copies of what essentially is the same term in multiple concepts, but instead we can link them, right? So we can create a term and then declare that this term is shared by this concept and this concept and this concept. And this has the advantage that, for example, if we change something about the term, if we change the grammatical label or add a new inflected form to it, then this change will automatically be propagated to all the other concepts that have this term. So again, this is a fairly unusual feature. I haven't seen a terminology management system that has this, but ours does have it because we have a need for it in the projects that we work on. Another feature that might perhaps interest you is that Terminologue always keeps a complete record of all edits, all changes. So you can always, when you're looking at an entry, you can always open the history tab or the history pane on the right-hand side of the screen, and you can see the previous versions of the entry going as far back as the moment when the entry was created. You can see who made the changes and when. And you can, as well as that, you can restore the old versions. So you can always undo changes. So it is, in a sense, Terminologue is completely baby-proof. Nobody can really break anything. Even if you change or delete something by mistake, you can always bring it back, or your colleagues can bring it back. And one last thing I want to mention is how we handle in Terminologue the situation where you want to bring in external subject area experts to look at your terminology and maybe to provide comments. So the way we handle that in Terminologue is that you can go into your term base and you can get a subset of the term base, let's say a bunch of entries, and you can put them on an extranet. And an extranet is a special section of the Terminologue website where you can invite external people to log in. And after they log in, they can look at the entries that you've made available to them and they can comment on them, right? So these external people are they are not allowed to make any changes to any of the entries, but they can look at them and they can add comments. And then you will be able to see their comments through Terminologue. So this is a feature we use a lot on a lot of the projects that we work on in Ireland, where we always and often need to invite external subject area experts to provide comments. So this has been a tour of the things that I think are quite special about Terminologue, but obviously the most special thing about it is that Terminologue is free and open source. So I mean, Terminologue is obviously free in the sense that you don't have to pay for using it if you just are happy using terminologue.org. But then Terminologue is also free in the sense that it's open source software. It's not proprietary software. So you can always download the source code and install an instance of it on your own computer or on your own server. And indeed, many people have already done that. And you can even contribute to its development. So Terminologue is currently being developed mostly by my colleagues and myself at Dublin City University, but we would very much welcome contributors from elsewhere. We already have a number of people who have contributed translations of the user interface into many other languages, as my colleague Brian has said, but equally as much as that, we would welcome sort of coders, programmers who might be willing to contribute their time. So this has been an overview of Terminologue as an open source terminology management system. In the title of our presentation, we have open source terminology solutions in the plural, but I have to say I'm not aware of any other open source terminology management systems. Obviously, there are other terminology management systems out there, ranging from commercial ones, which you have to pay for, to, let's say, ones that people have developed in-house for their own projects. But Terminologue is the first and only one that I'm aware of that's kind of freely available and is open source. It's currently being used by universities a lot, and sort of it's used a lot in the in what I would call public service terminology management, where, let's say, some institution somewhere in some country or some language is building a term base, like we are in Ireland. And I would say that my colleague Brian would maybe take over from me now and say a few more words about how Terminologue has been successful and what kind of users we typically have.
Well, I think we've run out of time, and I think I've answered some of those questions in the comments. I was just going to say, I think I learned yesterday that Fairterm is actually open source as well, but you just have to email them to get access. If I understood that correctly yesterday, so we're not the only ones, but maybe the first, I don't know. But yeah, so we'll stop there. Thanks very much.